The title is the headings that the translators of these passages gave to the respective passages. The first one, the teaching of King Lemuel's mother, and then that, I think, rather well-known ode to a capable wife. I see some of the women have a wry smile on their faces after listening to all that a capable wife should be doing. I have a confession to make, and I want to start off with that, and that is that I was very ignorant about the origins of Mother's Day. I thought it was just the perfect hallmark day that, generates good business, and it's nice to say thank you to mothers and so forth now and then, and have a specific day for it. I'm by nature curious, so I like to find out what are things about, and also Mother's Day, but for some reason I never really read much about it. And this time I did that. And it was interesting to find where the roots of Mother's Day lie. And I don't know whom of you are familiar with it, what the roots are and who the figures are, the mainly three figures that people claim that were instrumental in getting Mother's Day on the calendar in the US, and then after that in the world, and also who were formative in giving Mother's Day its original character. Whom of you are familiar with Anna Jarvis? Who knows that name? I have one maybe. And again, I also didn't know who Anna Jarvis was. Anna Jarvis was regarded by most as the important figure that did the initial work to get Mother's Day on the calendar. And her daughter, actually, also named Anna Jarvis, succeeded in doing that in 1908 in West Virginia, and then I think it was 1913 when there was a proclamation. No, sorry, 1910, a proclamation by the President of the United States to get it as an official day on the calendar in the US. Let me start with the matriarch, Anna Jarvis, the ninth of 11 siblings, grew up in West Virginia. And Anna Jarvis, preceding the time of the Civil War, worked very hard to get Mother's Day work groups together. She called it Mother's Day work groups because it was a day that she would say, okay, let's gather in work groups and do work to alleviate the plight of those who are poor, and also to help families who cannot properly take care of their children, especially children's health. So that was her work that she dedicated her life to. And then during the Civil War, Anna Jarvis was instrumental in getting communities or places set up, places of refuge for those who were wounded or afflicted by the Civil War. They could go to these camps or centers where they would get treatment, but not only physical treatment, but people, what we would call today as known as PTSD, they would go there and have a safe place where they could recuperate and just be and try to get to be themselves again after being exposed to the violence of the Civil War. After the Civil War, Anna continued her work, and she was very important in getting leaders from different sides of that terrible war, the Civil War, together, to talk to each other and to form, or to lay the foundations for going forward into the future as a united nation. She worked very hard to promote nonviolence, to promote peace. And that was her passion in the end, and also to do justice, societal justice. That was what Anna Jarvis was known for and where she played an important role. Her daughter continued her work. In a time when there was division, she stepped up again and said, let us find each other across the divide. And she continued this work until, as I say, in 1908 in West Virginia, Mother's Day was put on the calendar as a day to celebrate mothers and specifically their role in society, and the role specifically as peacemakers and people working to better society, to create a better society. 1910 or 1914, it was, and I said 1910, it was 1914, it was declared the National Day on the US calendar, and soon after the market moved in to capture this day. And the greeting card business and the flower business really took over, to the dismay and the anger of Anna Jarvis, the younger Anna Jarvis. She protested very fervently, and at one occasion she was arrested and taken by police and taken to the station, taken downtown, but released again. She continued her protest, she persisted with that, ended up with a lot of debt, and ended up in poor health as well. And she was admitted to a sanitarium where she died eventually. And interestingly enough, as an act of kindness by the market, those people in the greeting card business and in the flower business paid for her stay in the sanitarium. She was one of the figures, with the name Anna Jarvis, instrumental in Mother's Day in the US. The second figure, Julia Howe. Who knows that name? Okay, more people. Composer of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Another figure who worked very hard to promote peace and nonviolence. And then the third person, perhaps not that well known, Juliet Berkeley. Who knows that name? Juliet Berkeley, an interesting figure. Same passion for justice and peace, but especially influential in the temperance movement. There are two stories regarding her, the most well-known act. And the first side of the story is that in her church, her Methodist church in Michigan, when the minister was too intoxicated to deliver a sermon, she got onto the pulpit and gave a good sermon in favor of temperance. I think she would have found fertile ground for that on that occasion. The other side of the story, or the other version of the story, is that the minister wasn't intoxicated, that he was just disturbed because his son was arrested, or not arrested, was captured and forced by people against the temperance movement. They took him to a pub and forced him to drink so that he was completely intoxicated, and that disturbed the minister who was in favor of temperance to the extent that he wasn't able to preach. Now, I haven't had time to explore those two versions of the story, but Juliet Berkeley, an important figure. They are credited with being the most important figures and the driving force behind Mother's Day. A passion for peace, for nonviolence, a passion for bettering, improving society. In the scripture passages that we listen to, we have two passages that I think are a bit in tension with one another. It comes from the book of Proverbs, the last chapter. And the book of Proverbs, a collection of sayings in the ancient Middle East, including the people of Israel, that conveyed or tried to collect wisdom, conventional wisdom, wisdom for every day that could be typified as being conventional wisdom. So we have this collection, and this teaching by King Lemuel's mother is a bit at odds with most of the book of Proverbs. It addresses the king, and it says to the king, "My son, don't be a womanizer. Don't drink too much, because then you will not be able to govern properly," which is probably true if you devote too much energy and time to such activities. And then the interesting part where it says, "Give the drink to the people who are destitute and suffering to help them forget their misery." But then that nexus, or the important part of that teaching of Lemuel's mother, where she calls on him to judge righteously, to look after the poor, to be the voice of those who cannot speak for themselves, very clearly. And then there is the transition to that ode to the capable wife. The word that is translated as capable there can also is used most often in the Old Testament in the context of war. It's mostly translated, or most often translated, as valor or courage. So a capable woman should normally be translated as a woman of valor or a woman of courage. You have this shopping list of what a capable wife should do. Quite a list, I would say. The capable wife is somebody, if you read carefully, that supports her husband to what end? To the end that he can sit in the gates of the city with the elders. So all this, do this, so that your husband can have the time and can be recognized as a wise guy sitting in the gates of the city. That is where court cases were determined. That was where the court sat. That was where the town meeting was, except that it wasn't so democratic as we have it here. But that was where the important decisions were made, also for these capable women who did everything that enabled their husbands to have the time to sit and talk at the entrance to the city. I think, as I say, there's a bit of tension here between these two passages. And I think this last part was ended because that was the conventional wisdom, especially from a male-dominated society. From that perspective, say, this is what a wife should be like. You should do everything so that your husband can be the wise guy in the gates or the entrance to the city. I wonder which of these passages we reflect in our thinking about Mother's Day today. Do we find ourselves more attuned to what King Lemuel's mother tried to tell him? You, my son, should be somebody. This is my teaching to you, my son. Be somebody that looks after the poor, the marginalized, that speak for those who do not have a voice. Work for justice, work for peace. And here's the other side that it comes to the fore, not the other side, but a different perspective in the last part of chapter 31. This capable or this courageous wife, is that in conflict with the first? In our thinking about Mother's Day, I wonder what Anna Jarvis and Julia Howe and Juliet Berkeley would have thought about our Mother's Day today. If they would have had to evaluate their intent when they worked for a better society, and eventually when Anna Jarvis was successful in getting that on the calendar, what would they have think of what we make of Mother's Day today? Last week we celebrated in the service of some of the people in our congregation, in many instances women, serving the poor through preparing meals at LifeBridge. There are many other instances of service that we can celebrate as well. And I want to recognize that. Recognize also the service of women for their children, for their families. And I think it is good that we have this day where we are reminded that we should not assume their service, their love as a given. That we should at least make the time and take the opportunity to thank them in a special way. But I also think it will be good for us as a church and as families to honor and recognize in our midst those women who, in the spirit of Lemuel's mother and in the spirit of Anna Jarvis and Julia Howe and Juliet Berkeley, work for a better society, who are the advocates for the voiceless and the marginalized, who work so that a peaceful society can come into being. And I want to recognize today in our midst those, especially the women, that work in our congregation and who are leaders in this community in the movement to get sensible gun laws. You know who they are. And I don't want to name names because I'll forget someone or leave someone out, and then I'm in trouble in spite of my good intentions. I want to recognize and acknowledge those that were instrumental in trying to get something going and that had a very successful event last weekend with the Mental Health Forum. Looking at the very complex relationship between specifically opioid addiction and other addictions as well, and mental health. I think that was tremendously important work and very successful. I want to recognize those women among us who are working for eco-justice as well, and those that work for peace. Let us honor them as well as with those that do charitable work, with those that are good mothers and capable women or wives. Let us also honor these courageous people. And let us continue with a greater awareness of the nature of Mother's Day in the beginning. Honoring also Lemuel's mother. We don't know who King Lemuel was, and therefore also not who his mother was. But that said to him, speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And then I want to read you a quote from Julia Howe's Mother's Day Proclamation, dated 1870. I think it is still very relevant today, especially in our time where there's again saber-rattling, suggestions of war, and a lot of war talk being heard again. This quote from that Mother's Day Proclamation, 1870. Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, women of one country, will be too tender of those of another to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. Food for thought. Let us celebrate and enjoy Mother's Day. All you capable women.